Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Traci Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. This week is another fabulous guest episode, and with me I have Kamaria Scott, who is the founder and CEO of Enetic, a boutique consulting firm that specializes in helping organizations improve manager performance and enabling them to lead engaged, healthy, and high-achieving teams. An accomplished industrial organizational psychologist, she has shaped her expertise over 2 decades, influencing both innovative startups and corporations such as BNY Mellon, FIS, and Accenture. She focuses on aligning HR strategies with business objectives, fostering collaborative success. Initiatives under her leadership have achieved the Learning Elite Award by Chief Learning Officer magazine in 2018 and 2019. Kamaria also hosts the Manager to Manager podcast, a platform where she extends her passion for leadership development and managerial excellence. The podcast serves as a valuable resource for new and seasoned managers alike, offering actionable advice, best practices, and personal stories to inspire and guide listeners in their leadership journeys. Welcome, Kamaria. I'm so glad to have you on.
Oh, thank you. It's always weird to listen to my bio. I'm like, who is she? What does she do?
Right. I know, right? It's funny when you are sitting down and someone's talking about all of the achievement that you've had and you're like, wait, do I know that person? Oh, wait, that's me. That's great.
Me.
Love that.
I tell people, I wake up in the morning and I feel like my greatest accomplishment is turning oxygen and carbon dioxide into the life. I do other things.
I love that. You should get a shirt that says, I turn oxygen into carbon dioxide.
I know I might put it on a mug. I'm a mug girl, so.
Oh, yeah, you should. And then you can show it off during your next podcast episode, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are mugs out there on Etsy that you can maybe find. So with this, obviously, you have an extensive background and I would say expertise and, as we mentioned, passion for management. And so we're going to talk about management and what that means and what it is to be a manager. Mm-hmm. But before doing that, and I realize this might be a little bit backwards, but we'll just go with it. Okay. I'd love to talk a little bit about change management because this is something that I think, and I think we discussed this, is often one of the more difficult parts of leading and one of the more difficult parts of being a manager or being even in an organization where you have to disseminate information or change. So can you start by taking the listeners through the definition of change management or what it is and how we find change management in organizations?
Yes. So I always use just a very human definition, which is generally, for me, change management is guiding people from where they are now to where they need to be. It is the journey of getting people to stop doing something you don't want them to do or start doing something you do want them to do. And when I'm talking to people, leaders and executives, I always just kind of use that term, right? We are somewhere today. We want to be somewhere tomorrow. And the process of getting them there is change management. It's all the things we do in the middle to take them on that very deliberate journey to a new destination.
Thank you. That's amazing. I love that you defined it or called it a human definition, because really, I think actually this is kind of where change management can sometimes fall apart, is when we forget who the recipient of that change is. And so keeping that audience in mind is so important.
Well, I think it's always where it falls apart. You know, when I think about change management and what I typically see, it's almost like that very we're changing computer systems. This one was here before, that one's here tomorrow. We flip the switch and voila, it's done. And we forget that every transaction, everything that happens like that involves humans that have to go on that same journey. And so managing the human side of change and people who are in the process of that is really, really important. So that's more so what I do. And so when I think about, the methodology that I love the most is ADKAR, because it really talks about it as phases that people go through in terms of getting to and accepting change. And it acknowledges that, people can get stuck in different places and we have to help them get unstuck.
That's really interesting. And as you're saying that too, I was thinking about whether or not people are resistant to change or afraid of change? Like, is there a difference, or are they the same thing? Is it
Yeah.
neither of those?
I would say it's both, honestly. So there's a great saying, and I can't remember what book it came from, but where they said people don't mind change, they mind change happening to them.
Hmm.
And that is the part that I think people are resistant to. It's you're kind of humming along, living your life, and then whoop, something has changed. And you didn't have a say in the change. No one asked you, and you now have to get your bearings. And I think that's the part that people are resistant to. And there's also the acknowledgement that change sometimes means loss. You do
Hmm.
have to give up and move away from something. That's one of the reasons why I love referring to it as a journey, because change is inherently you are moving away from something towards something else, and in that moving away there is loss. One of the ways that I often sort of talk about change is I grew up in a military family, and so from the time that I was 3 till I was a freshman in high school, we moved every at least 3 years, sometimes a little bit more. And so
Wow.
it was like the physical manifestation of change, and that you were literally leaving a destination and going to another one. And what that means is you leave behind friends, you leave behind old ways, you leave behind what's familiar, and you're going to something else. And that is what change feels like for people. But it doesn't always have to suck, because then you get to look forward to something else. You get to look forward to a new destination, new friends, new food, new experiences, and helping people kind of on that physical journey from one thing to the next is where we have to help people. But what they get afraid of is they don't know what that new destination is. They don't
Hmm.
know where they're going to, and what they're resistant to is the things they have to give up from that old destination.
That's really fascinating. And I appreciate you sharing your own personal experience with change. And it immediately made me think that you are a change expert because you've experienced change
Oh
from
yes.
such an early age, right? It's like you were just made for this and it was destiny. But then I wonder, then, based on kind of what you're sharing, and of course it brings up for me this term agility and how we can be agile. But would you consider change a skill? That's something that inevitably people can develop and get better at?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, what also, stands out to me from my childhood of learning to move all the time is that you stay change ready. And so that's what I call it. Like I call it being change ready. And I would talk to my
I love
teams
that.
about like being change ready. And that just basically means it's a little bit of resilience. It's a little bit of like, okay, I know that this is coming, but there are things that we do every single time. I did a district HR talk, those 5-minute talks where you could talk about a topic. And literally my topic was, adventures in relocation, change from a military child. And I talked about my mom in those talks because there was things that she would do every time we were moving that kind of helped us navigate the change. She would sit down with us
Mm.
and, find a map and say, here's the destination of where you're going. And we would learn about different things, and she'd build up the excitement for us. But she'd also, check in with us along the way. And, when we got to our location, she let us roam around and figure out our new surroundings. And she fully utilized the support that the military gave to us during that process. And that translates into when people are going through change, helping them to look toward what they're gaining. So they're always kind of silver lining. We talk about growth
Mhm.
mindset a lot. And so it's
Mhm.
helping people enact that growth mindset to, okay, but what's the positive? What can I be gaining from this? It is giving them the opportunity to be little scientists and experiment with what's going to work going forward. How am I going to find my way to success? And it's also helping them figure out, like, how do you leverage resources? How do you be resilient and innovative in what you're trying to do? So there are skills that come with learning to navigate change that if we can help people to really hone those skills and for them to almost kick in automatically, they can get
Mhm.
much better at change.
That's amazing. I love that story that you shared with your mom, and obviously change expertise then is something that's hereditary because she figured out how to make change management
happen for you and
Yes.
your family. And that's really, really neat. And then, of course, as a mother myself, it makes me think about how much being a parent, being a mom can really equip you with the tools that you need to manage effectively.
Oh, absolutely. And there have been times in my career where I've gotten in trouble for equating parenting and leading a team. People don't like when you say that, but there are very strong similarities. Not that the people that you lead are children, but you've been given a
Right.
responsibility for other people and their well-being. And so you kick in some of those same skills and some of those same habits and routines that you learn. And I tell people all the time, being a parent made me a better manager. The way that I
Mm-hmm.
had to learn patience and learn difference and learn all kinds of things, I brought that to work with me. And that's even how I honed my approach to leading a team.
That's amazing. It's effectively a transferable skill set. I
Yes,
mean, and I like what you said that it's not about it's not treating your employees like children, because certainly that's not the message. It's the skills that you develop on the job, which really are truly on the job, because nobody
all day,
prepared,
every day.
right? You
Yes.
could read 3,000 books, you could study it, you could literally like take every course.
You can.
Nothing prepares you for
No.
being.
If you know me in my personal life, you know that I've said parenting is a full contact sport. If you know me as a manager, you know I say managing is a full contact sport. Like you have to get in the game, and once you're in the game, you're figuring it out on the fly. So it's yeah, I mean it's very similar. There are transferable skills, and I love that you said that because there are skills that are transferable that help people navigate change.
Right.
And when they can start thinking about times in their lives when they've had to navigate change, they can start pulling some of those things back in.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I think this is a perfect segue for us because we are talking a lot about managing and leading. And I'd love to first preface by saying I saw your recent LinkedIn post where you talked about how someone shared with you, and I could be quoting this incorrectly, so just keep me honest here.
Yeah.
Someone shared with you that they didn't like the term manager
Yes.
and rather they liked the term leader.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people feel that way because, and what you wrote in your post is that manager often invokes this feeling of being micromanaged or like, just an overbearing leadership style or management style, which I think is really on the nose. And that's why a lot of people don't really prefer the term
Oh,
manager. Even I
yes.
found myself sometimes referring to my manager, who I love and is probably the best manager I've ever worked for. I'm sometimes feel like I need to say she's my leader rather than manager, because there are a lot of those, connections that people make between the term manager and poor management skill.
Yes.
So, with that, I think this is kind of leading us to this topic around what it is to be a manager and the job that people who are leading people have, because inevitably in this day and age, they have their own jobs and they're managing
That's
people.
right.
So it's a lot.
It is
That's
a
two
lot.
jobs.
So, and I love that conversation because, and I jokingly tell people, you might find me in the comments and LinkedIn tussling in the comments about when there's good leader, bad leader, manager, leader,
Right.
oh, make it stop. But here's the thing for me. One, I think when I think manager it'll probably be my life's mission to like reclaim that word. I think of someone who is, I always say it's an artist, a scientist, and a coach. And so as an artist, you are tapping into yourself and figuring out how do you lead people? What strengths do you have that help you lead people? So we're all kind of coming at it our own way, and we have to own that we are people who have to lead other people. And what does that mean? The scientist part means that you have to be someone who is constantly scanning the environment. You heard me talk about small experiences during change. You're always aware of what's happening with your team, and you're figuring out, how do I move and motivate people? So I know that maybe, Traci might on her best day be someone who is creative, and she is someone who can, be a self-starter and all these wonderful things. And I've got to do all these many experiments to figure out, how do I keep Traci at her best day? What will deter her? What's going to make her better? How do I help her? And then the coach part is, we're in this partnership relationship where I am pulling out of you what's best. So if you think about coaching, and I am in the process of getting my ICF certification, so I'm literally using coach in the definition that it is a partnership relationship where I know it's in you, it's in me to bring it out of you, and or to help you realize that it's in you. So it's not me leading you. And that's where I think the separation from like maybe how we might lead our children and maybe how we lead a team is different, is that I know you're already great. I just had to help you kind of pull it out.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's what a manager is in terms of like role. But I also want to be super clear that a manager is somebody that has direct responsibility. It is a position that you hold in the organization. Your box is above somebody else's box. And so where I kind of start having people differentiate between leader, we say anyone can be a leader. You don't have to lead people to be a leader. You can have
1,000%.
positional power, which is technically manager, but you could be like somebody who has a lot of influence because you've been in the organization for a really long time. That's an influence methodology that also makes you a leader. So when I'm talking about managers, I'm always really clear that I am talking about somebody who has been entrusted with the actual responsibility of leading, guiding, coaching other people, and has to do some of the fun stuff, the not so fun stuff. I have to do the
Right.
performance appraisal. When you're
Right.
not performing well, I have to do the performance improvement plan, right? So there are
Right.
actual responsibilities that come with being a manager that are not like, I am a leader. So that's why I always am very differentiated in that language.
Well, I like that. And it actually, I think when we first spoke about this, it did make me think a little bit differently, even about some of the things that I have shared on my podcast, because I even did an episode, oh gosh, maybe almost 2 years ago at this point, about my experience with a quote unquote bad leader.
Yes.
And, so I thought about that after our discussion, because it's really less about a bad leader and more about the way in which they led me, or the way that maybe their lack of leading me, depending on the way that we look at it. And when we think about leadership or management in the context of skills development
Mm-hmm.
and competency, because all of that is related, there are managers and leaders who have better developed skills and who
That's
are more
right.
competent. And so that does then kind of relay or impact, I should say, the employees who are reporting into those people.
Yes.
And with this also, you talked about how, and I fully agree with this, and I love the way you put it, that there are position based leadership roles, and
Yes.
then there's influence based leadership. And I agree, because if everyone, I just was talking about this with my own manager, if everyone saw their potential in terms of how they could be leaders, how they are leaders in their own right, regardless of the position or their status in an organization, organizations would probably be much further along,
Oh,
generally
absolutely.
speaking, right?
Absolutely. And I think like over the years I have developed kind of my thinking in the way that I talk about managers. And so I say like you can be an effective manager or you can be an ineffective manager. Either way, you're still a manager. Like I sit in this seat whether I do a
Right.
good job or a bad job. That's just
Right.
what it is, right?
So
And
true. Yeah.
so my effectiveness as a manager is the extent to which I lead someone in a way that they want to be led and it brings out the best in them, both personally and for the organization. That's effectiveness, right? So you can be ineffective as a manager. Meaning, I still sit in the seat, but I'm not leading you in a way that makes sense for you. I'm not helping you bring out the best in you. And so the journey is to help people be effective managers. And what I love, you interviewed my good friend Ben Eubanks. Ben says we all suck in the beginning, and he's right,
He's right.
because we all start leading a team with no clue of how to do it. No, and you go from a role where you are your greatest responsibility
Mm-hmm.
to
Right.
now I have other people that I'm responsible for. So I think it's really, helping people to learn, as you said, those competencies, those skills, develop it over time. And you don't develop it until you get into it, even though you can try to train people. It's
Mm-hmm.
not until you have that first situation where you have to tell somebody something that you're like, oh, I got to give them bad news. Or you have to even, separate someone from the organization. You learn from every experience and you become more effective. So I try not to treat it like a dichotomy. I like
Mm-hmm.
change. I try to treat it like a journey. And that's even how I develop people leaders. I treat their development like a journey. I treat it like there's a starting point that they're at, and now we have to get them to a new destination.
That's a wonderful way of thinking about this. And it's also very tangible. Like when you hear the word journey, my first thought, you share yours. My first thought is like, I see a map or like a road, right? So for someone else, maybe they see the same thing. Maybe they see a GPS. If they're Gen Z, maybe they, it's not about a compass. It's about like Google Maps, depending. And I like that because, I do think the visualization of what change is, the visualization of what managing is, it actually makes it easier to understand.
Yeah.
And maybe the efficacy is something that feels less about like either you are effective or you're not effective, and more about how do you become effective? How do you become more effective? And, one of the other things that I was thinking about is, this is an HR podcast primarily, and we talk about a lot of things, but the majority of listeners are HR professionals, or they're, actively seeking an HR role. And many HR leaders are in many ways, either individual contributors or people who don't start to manage people until they're in more senior roles.
Mm-hmm.
And that creates a lot of interesting situations for HR professionals, especially when they are the ones who are more often than not leading change management initiatives, having to train on change management or having to train on the journey through change, if we're using that terminology, right? Like,
yes,
all of that.
Let's talk about that. So, couple, like you hit a spot in my spirit with this one. So here's the thing, right? And I love this because, what I think experience, it's important to have experience because experience gives you perspective. I, like many of us in HR, and my background is HR. So just even, beyond my, bio, I started in L&D at a hospital, and I was able to, first I did orientation, like every day for 2 weeks, I'd welcome people to the hospital, and I did like, professional development things. And then I started doing more leadership development things and more manager development things. And I became a coach to managers, but I did all of that before I actually managed a team. And a lot of us in HR who are making policy, and it's not a value judgment, but we kind of have an idea of what should be the case. And then there was a point in my career where I became a manager, and I am a manager in HR. So I'm sitting in two seats. I'm sitting in the like downstream of what we said, and I was in the room when we said it. But then when I had to do it with my own team, I was like, what is this? Like, who did this? And I was like, oh, wait, we did. My goodness. And there are so many of us who are actually managers who are in HR. So we kind of can see it from two different perspectives. But what I learned is that it's really important to have a client-centric view of the things that you are doing and to sort of involve them in the process of creating the solutions. And so, when working in HR, when this happens to us all the time, we will create things not just for managers, but for the business. And then the business will look at us and go, girl, we're not doing that. That is so fun. Good. I'm so good for you. Right. But it's not happening. Right. And that is what happens to managers. And one of the things I really love to do is sit with HR leaders and talk about what is everything that we have asked managers to do. And not only what is everything that we've asked managers to do, but did we confer with the business lines and everything they've asked managers to do? Because quite often there's not alignment. So when I talk about like manager performance, I use a model that I call the will, the skill, and the way. Because inevitably I have some conversation with some leader who's like, they won't do the thing, Kamaria. Whatever the thing is, they won't do it. And we talk about, well, why won't they do the thing? And so when I talk about the will, I talk about one, self-defeating outcomes. I have taught courses, performance management. Again, this was before I was a manager, so I didn't understand it until I became a manager, where someone said to me, and I'm like, you need to manage people out of the organization. We don't want low performers. It's not fair to your other people. And I had a manager look me dead in my face and say, girl, I am not doing that. Let me tell you why. If I manage this person out of the organization, there is a 70% chance that my requisition to replace them will not be approved. And so now I have 0% of a person doing this job. And there's not a value judgment to that, right? Because we could go back and forth about whether that's right or wrong. But what I appreciated was that person sharing with me why they wouldn't do it. Because now we can solve for it. One of the other issues that we have, right, is competing priorities. HR says you should do one thing. The business line says you should do another. But they're going to listen to the business line. And so we've not come to an agreement on what good looks like for someone in that nature. So there's a bunch of
Yeah.
different things that we talk about, but it wasn't until I became a manager that I understood the experience better. And that's why you'll often hear me talk about enablement, manager enablement, in addition to training, because it's one thing to give people a skill set. It's quite another to understand all the roadblocks and all the challenges that happen organizationally that stand in the way of them being successful. I went on a little path there, but
No, I say keep going. I think it's really helpful. And I mean, when you even if we take it even a step further, and I love this will, skill, and way, the will, the skill, and the way.
yes.
I think about how, I guess, what the implication is when HR professionals haven't had the experience yet of managing people.
Mm-hmm.
Because as much, I think that I have met more amazing HR professionals than I've met non or ineffective, let's say, less than amazing HR professionals. Like 9 times out of 10, there are people out there in HR roles who really want to help to transform people and businesses, and they want there to be that alignment. And with that, I think there's so much will, and there's potentially a little bit of the way, but the skill portion, it's again, it's kind of like an on the job thing. When I think about like right now, I'm an individual contributor in my quote unquote day job, as I like to call it.
Yes.
Because I have my podcast, and that's a whole other thing. I am a one woman show in that way. But when I think about like my job where I am an individual contributor, I'm often pulling from my experience in past roles where I managed a team, because it's so easy to make decisions or think in a vacuum rather than really thinking about what that decision means, how it impacts someone who does have a team, who doesn't have a team, because there inevitably is a difference.
Oh, absolutely.
And that skill portion is hard.
Well, there's a difference in even how big is your team? Where is your team? What does your team do? How long have you been leading a team? You know, I am grateful that when I first started leading, I had one direct report. One. And I was able to kind of learn on one before I went to many. But things like, let's say we do a spans and layers exercise. And this is why I sort of love sitting in like I know HR, because I've been in HR for many, many years, but I also know managing. And so I kind of connect the dots on the two. Let's just say we do a spans and layer exercise. And for people that may not know, that's where one of your favorite external consultant comes in and goes, no, we're going to flatten out the organization. And so no one can now lead a team less than 5. Okay, so that means if I'm a new manager and I'm cutting my teeth in management, I don't get the benefit of leading 2 people. I have to start with 5.
Yeah,
if I'm in a tech company and I'm somewhere else in the world, and then I have like 15 direct reports because we're all coders. That's a different experience. And so really understanding the experience, and you don't have to be in it yourself, but you have to have the awareness of the difference, and you have to be somebody who can make friends. And so like, and by that, I mean, you know, one of the things that really helped me when I was in corporate America, was my willingness to go and sit side by side with somebody and be curious about their experience and to ask the right questions. And before I came up with a solution, I would make sure I fully understood. And I credit that with, you know, my friends that are in L&D will know whenever we're designing content, we're wanting to make it real, we go talk to the subject matter experts so we can get the, you know, make it transferable. And that skill set served me well in being able to say, okay, I am designing this, but how does it come to fruition in real life, and for who? Does it work over here? Does it work over there? And by that, I would sometimes figure out that it may have been a fantastic idea in my head. It might have been a great idea conceptually, but there's things that I've missed because I don't have the experience. And so I would build my own little network of friends that I'd be like, hey, let me run this by you. Hey, and I mean, obviously we call them focus groups officially, but sometimes you just pick up the phone and you're like, let me ask you a question. You manage 5 people. Would this be practical for you? Does this work for you? And sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, it's fine. And sometimes I'll be like, absolutely not, ma'am. I'm not doing that. Let me tell you why. And that's why I absolutely appreciate that training experience that I had with that manager who was really honest about, no, let me tell you why I'm not going to do that. That can manifest itself in a lot of ways. So we think about again, a should. Managers should be willing to give away their top talent, right? We say it all the time in HR. No, you have to let them go, or they'll leave the organization. You should.
Yeah.
And this is true. But if you've been a manager, you've also been a manager who's been like, but I've developed my team to do all the things that need to get done.
Yeah.
And no one's going to lower my goals because I now have given away my top talent. I still have to figure it out. So I'm not saying it's an excuse, but what I'm saying is when you understand the challenges, you're better able to design solutions that help and solve for those challenges. And then you're enabling those managers to be successful.
Yeah, all of that. I mean, what more is there to say? I think that's absolutely right. And that it's so funny because I've had so many of those discussions with managers like who inevitably have amazing talent and they're just destined for more greatness and they want something new or something different. And it's really hard when you invest all of your time and so much of your time into someone's development and potential that then you do such a good job that they're capable and qualified for something else like that. If anything, that's like the perfect way to say really good job, manager, because you've developed them so well and you've prepared them so much for this next step. But it's hard. It's really hard.
It is hard. And I think what like the challenge for us as HR people is to just have an awareness. And I really in one of my organizations, we did, a wonderful hypo program and my team was challenged with, developing something in it. And we were talking about that challenge. We're talking about why people won't give away their talent. And we went and again, I used my own personal experience, but we also interviewed so many other managers to kind of just really understand the challenge. And it was like, well, one, while I'm replacing that person, I still have goals to meet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I'm going to get somebody of equal talent to the person I gave away. So again, other policies to think about when we say things like, we want to make sure that we are hiring. When our talent strategy says we want to hire people that are fresh out of college, that is wonderful. But if that means that the person who's been with the organization for 15 years is being replaced by somebody who now has 3 years of work experience, it's important to consider the impact that has on the actual people leader and the performance that has to be done. And again, it's not an excuse, but it's like if you're aware of the barrier, that's the way, part of the will skill way. Then you think about how do we solve for that. So in our sort of solutioning, we were like, well, how do we create something that helps us, use our systems, our internal HR systems to figure out if there's an equal level of talent for a talent swap. So I know that if I'm giving Traci away and I'm gonna go get, Emily, that I'm at least getting equivalence with Emily. Those are the type of things that we have to be thinking about in terms of helping people to be successful. Because if you ask, they'll tell you why they don't do the things they do, but we want them to do. And in HR, being able to help them navigate change is critical. Because think about how many HR initiatives fail, not because they're not well intentioned or even well designed, but maybe we missed the change part of it. Maybe we missed having conversation around, did we check in with the end user, our managers, on how this is going to impact them and what barriers they see? And how do we solve for some of those things? So it's really important to even have some sort of an upward feedback channel. And I've literally never, except for when I've done it myself, worked in an organization that had a deliberate manager feedback channel that said, hey, here's a red flag. If we put something out and it's not working, please let us know. Don't have me at my desk pushing the button and the button doesn't work.
Right. That's such a good point. And it's also a really good point around what, like, just the difference when talent is moving and the changes. And I think the example that you used also of someone who maybe has 15 years of working experience or experience in that particular role or industry being potentially replaced by, not because of necessarily hiring strategies, but also potentially because of the talent pool or, all different, maybe it is a talent strategy, by someone who has much less experience, which is not right or wrong. It just might be the case. How that, I like that you pointed out the impact that might have, and also how to really like change expectations and level set expectations and adjust what is the potential performance expectation or outcome that this new person might have, which is really full circle for us because we started off talking about change management in this episode.
Yes.
And really this does come back to your point on the change management effectiveness really being a journey, and that leaders, especially HR leaders, to your point, have to really think about the not only like the present and what their decision presently is and what it will do, but also how they're going to manage through that change, who they're going to take with them. I love that you mentioned the focus group also, because it really is so important to have those few colleagues in different areas of the organization, managers, non-managers, et cetera, who can provide that feedback loop openly, so that there isn't this waste of time if something is not working.
Absolutely.
It's all of that is a really important part of the journey.
There. And there's something amazing. That's one of the reasons why I like sort of what I do straddles change and managers, because any change that you have in the organization goes through managers. So it just doesn't happen without them. And you, over time, when you become more effective as a manager, these things don't rattle you anymore, because now you know how to adjust. You know that, okay, I'm going to have to spend more time over here with this person, or, okay, so maybe I personally cannot develop this person, but I have developed someone who is my person, who now I want her to prepare her for her own leadership responsibility. So let me help her figure out how she can start to maybe coach, mentor other people on the team. So you do start to kind of figure it out over the years, but it's like anything else, there's a maturity model to becoming an effective manager. And the more we invest in people from that perspective and create it in a way that it is aspirational. So, and I could do sayings all day long. Train and blame is not a development strategy. That's one of the reasons why I bring it back to LinkedIn, why I'm always like, stop doing that, because train and blame is not how people get better. It's giving them that destination. You can be the type of people leader, and sometimes I say people leader for people who don't like manager, but you can be the type of people leader who can navigate these challenges, who can, manage a team, who can bring out the best in people, who can hit your organization goals. And we're going to show you how. And that's the part that has to be involved in anything that we're doing that develops managers. And then from an HR perspective, I think our skill set, or our development, is to get better at co-creation, is to get better at understanding the challenges and doing design thinking, where we are bringing and we're solving for people and understanding who all of the stakeholders are in a particular change initiative so that it can be successful. I was doing a focus group with HR people, and we were talking, one of my favorite questions is, what are the managers not doing? And they give me all the list, right? Or I say, well, what does good look like? What do you want them to be doing, right? And as we were going through it, one of them had this aha realization where he said, you know what? We asked them to do so much. When I'm looking at all the times, like, you could almost make it a drinking game. How many times can you say the manager can do it?
Right. Oh my gosh. People would be sloshed.
Right. People would be sloshed. And so his realization, he was like, we actually asked the managers to do so much from an HR perspective, forgetting that they actually also have their operational line job to do as well. So I don't know about you when you were leading a team, but like for me, I had the HR things I was supposed to do, my one-on-ones, my, but I had actual real deliverables that I had to produce as well. Things like actual work to be done. And so the question begs, like, do we want managers who are doing work when we went to this player coach model? Who said that was a good idea? And I'm not saying that it's not, but like but what's the right percentage? Have we questioned that? Like, should I be 50-50? Should I be 70-30? And so, my challenge for HR is, when you bring in those consulting companies that tell you to flatten it out or use player coach, ask the right questions of like, well, how much time do we think a manager should spend managing their teams versus doing individual contributor work? How much time should they spend coaching, training, developing versus doing administrative tasks? Get better at understanding those types of things. Because going back to, I hate the word manager, if we're going to reclaim that word and we're going to make it something that people aren't so afraid of or aren't so adverse to, we have to give people who are doing the job the space to show up in a different way, so people can say manager. So like, I don't mind people calling me a manager. For me, it's a badge of honor, because I see it as I've been entrusted with other people, and it's a responsibility that I have, but I would want other people to have the opportunity to be the best in that role that they can be.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all of that. I mean, my whole like perspective on how change management is really a journey, how managers can be effective or they can be like all of this has been really impactful on my just really like rethinking some of the closely held beliefs that I think I had from my own experiences. And I'm sure that I hope that there were listeners also who felt similarly, that they're like, oh, actually, maybe I need to rethink how I talk about management, how I talk about leadership. And so if I see you tussling in the comments on LinkedIn, I'm going to back you up.
You back me up. That's right.
Kamaria's right. I'm going to heart everything. Maybe I'll laugh at a couple things,
Thank you.
Yeah. So I've got your back. I think you have a wonderful perspective on all of these things that are really so pervasive in organizations and really relevant. So I really appreciate you coming on my podcast to enlighten all of us.
Oh, thank you for having me. As you can see, I'm so passionate about this topic, and anytime I can chat about it and sort of just elevate people who do this role and celebrate them as well. And, we talked about my podcast, and I always call my podcast, it's called Manager to Manager. I call it my love letter to people leaders, because, the one thing I would leave people with, and especially in HR, is this is again, it's a full contact sport. It's a complex role, and we don't thank good managers enough. We don't identify them, and we don't thank them enough. And as you're thinking about even your compensation policies, are you recognizing and rewarding good people leaders, or are you just hoping it's going to happen along the way of them actually meeting organizational goals? So thank you for letting me just, chat about it with you and your listeners. And I greatly appreciate it.
Of course. And actually with that, why don't you let everyone know where they can connect with you, learn more about Enetic, and listen to your podcast?
Yes. Well, like everyone else, please connect with me on LinkedIn. That way you can see more of my delightful posts about managers. And then literally the podcast, as I mentioned, is called Manager to Manager. So you can literally find it at managertomanager.com. But you can also find it at all your favorite places: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, all the things. You can find it there. And then you can find me at Enetic, ENETICLPS.com. But again, just reach out. I'm a fan of a coffee talk and just getting to know people. And so you want to talk managers? And let me do a shameless plug while I'm here. If you know a good people leader, I'd love to have them on my podcast. I consider it a way to highlight people who are doing a great job. And so if you are or report to a wonderful people leader, I'd love to talk with them.
Oh, I'm going to ask my manager if she would get on the podcast.
There you go.
This is awesome. I'm glad you plugged that.
Yeah, it's a great way to say thank you. And I love all of my guests, because they, I've had, this is my first external podcast, but I've done it twice inside of organizations. And I have always found that when someone, it's a small thank you, right? It's not, you didn't win a Honda, that's nothing on your Oprah chair, but like just the recognition that someone thinks that you did a really good job and wants to give you airspace to talk about what you do. I've seen so many managers just be so honored and thrilled that someone noticed the job that they were doing. So it's kind of my small way of giving back.
I love that. I love that so much. So everyone listening, you heard it here first. If you have someone in mind, like I do, then make sure you send them to Kamaria so they can get that additional recognition. Kamaria, thank you so much again. And for everyone listening, I'll have all of those links in the show notes as well.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.